Hello.
Hi. Welcome to
Yeah,
the Fireside Chat.
live for LudoNarraCon, which is a combination of all of my favorite things, games and narrative and cons. So
God, don't we miss them? I've never loved a con so much as in the year 2021, I think.
you can remember the good things and forget the rest.
Yeah, we
So
can
should we
move forward with
introduce
that.
ourselves?
Absolutely. I'm Natalie Watson. I'm the associate producer at Half Mermaid.
And I'm Sam Barlow, and I am the founder of Half Mermaid, which is a video game developer in Brooklyn. And you may know me, if you do know me, for a bunch of video games. If you're from the Silent Hill crew, then you might know me for Silent Hill Origins and Silent Hill Shattered Memories. And then more recently, you may know me for the indie games Her Story and Telling Lies. Both obviously very suitable to this conference because they did unique things with narrative. And that was kind of the point.
I unfortunately don't have a game under my belt, but next year when we do this again, I will get to say that I have our project under my belt.
You did a good job of not accidentally saying the secret name of the project.
Oh, yes, no, I'm very I'm very aware. Speaking of the secret project, we are working on a secret project.
Yeah, it's on Steam, right? We have a mystery Steam page. I think it's possibly the most mysterious of all Steam pages, under the working title of Project Ambrosio.
I think we can claim most mysterious, definitely. There's a lot of mystery in there. I don't know. You can go diving in and see what you find, but a lot of it's still yet to be uncovered. How did we get to the mysterious Steam page, Sam?
Yeah, let's talk about this project. I feel like a fireside chat is the right place to kind of dig in a little bit. All stories originally came from the campfire and from people sharing over the campfire, so it's very applicable. It's a very deep and dark and weird and twisty story of how we came to make this project. So last game I made was Telling Lies. And we kind of started working on this one a little bit after we wrapped on Telling Lies. But the kind of origins of it go back to kind of the Her Story time. So imagine, if you will, me, British indie dev. I put out Her Story, and it's something of a success. It does pretty well, wins a bunch of awards. And quickly off of that success, I get myself an agent, and I get to start doing all these fun meetings in Hollywood. Right. So I think that, Hollywood is super into video games now. They kind of are looking for what's going to be the next comic books when we've used all the comic books, which I think will take them some time. And so they're really interested in video games. So I put out this game, Her Story, which is a narrative video game, and it's using live action footage, and it's in a genre kind of gothic crime fiction, which people get. So everyone in Hollywood kind of understands what I've made and is kind of excited, and they want to speak to the video game people. So I get sent on a bunch of cool meetings, which is very fun. Getting to go to like the studio lot, not as a tourist, but because I have a meeting at Amblin or whatever, and it's like very cool. And alongside all of this, I get to go to a bunch of like Hollywood parties where it's all like famous or semi-famous people and everyone's hanging out. And one of these parties, everyone's just chatting about movies and the history of movies, and everyone's obviously super into all that stuff out there. And they start talking about this actress who made these 3 movies that never came out. and then she disappeared. And it's like, I'm a sucker for urban myths and all these kinds of things, and I've never heard of this actress or these movies, but it kind of sounds interesting, and I do like it. I do a few more of these kind of parties and speak to a few people, and I can't decide if this is like some weird in-joke that people talk about this person,
They're testing
or
you.
if it's genuinely, or it's like, what is that movie that everyone thinks existed but didn't exist, about a genie? It's like the 80s or 90s.
Oh, is this like a simulation example type thing?
I want to call it, it's not Shazam, that's the Marvel movie. There's a movie and everyone thinks this movie existed, and it turns out it didn't. We just all
the Sinbad genie movie?
Yes, the Sinbad genie movie never existed, but people will swear. And so I'm like, is this some weird thing like that? And everyone, like, it seems to be that like everyone who's cool, when I dig into it, claims to have at some private party seen some footage of these movies. Like, everyone has it. It's like everyone has like some secret photo of Marilyn Monroe type thing. And I'm like super into it, and I dig into it, and I'm Googling the hell out of it and finding nothing. And so I kind of at some point lose interest, and we go off and I make Telling Lies.
Yeah.
So Telling Lies was done with Annapurna over in LA, and we shoot the whole of Telling Lies in LA with a bunch of really cool actors. And so I'm out in LA for that. And whilst I'm there, this strange man reaches out to me because he's seen her story, and he's kind of got a sense of like what Telling Lies is. And he wants to talk to me because he has all this footage from these missing movies, and he wants to do something with it, and he doesn't have enough. So I think like around this time, like Netflix did that Orson Welles thing where they kind of restored lost Orson Welles movie, The Other Side of the Wind. And it was kind of amazing because there's a bunch of like lost Orson Welles movies, and most of them are truly lost. But this was one where they were like, no, we can actually create something that looks like a movie, right? And put it on Netflix. This apparently is not possible, but he's like played her story and seen I am stuff with these fragmentary kind of narratives, and the semi kind of true crime documentary feel of her story, explain like exactly how Telling Lies is working with this kind of larger narrative. And so he's like, I really want you to come see the stuff that I have. And at this point, like, I'm still doing some of these Hollywood meetings, and a lot of them are, we have a YouTuber who really wants to make a video game, and we thought you could license them the Her Story tech and they could make their own video game. So there's like lots of these meetings where you show up and very instantly you're like, it's fine.
Yeah.
Right. Or it's like the US Army asking if I could help them make a game to train people in interrogations.
My God.
And you're like, that sounds, nope. Not gonna do that. So I'm kind of, okay, I'll have a meeting with this guy.
You're at the tail end of your LA sort of era at this point.
Yeah, at this point, the glitz and glamour is, I've seen through it. I've had enough fancy cocktails and crudités and pool parties. But I meet with this guy, and then he tells me, I have this footage that is from the famous three lost movies of Marissa Marcel, which is this actress that people have been telling me these weird kind of urban myths about. So,
and how many years later is this? This is like her stories.
Her stories were 2015 it released. So I was doing they call it the water bottle tour.
Yeah.
Because you go between all these meetings in studios, and everyone gives you a bottle of water. So you end up like just there's all these empty bottles in your car. So that would have been like 2015, 2016. And Telling Lies we shot at the tail end of 2018.
Wow.
over into kind of 2019. So this was like a good few years later. So that was like a real kind of Twilight Zone moment of like, this is weird. Yeah, so anyway, we kind of got into it. And we've been figuring out how to do something with this material and how to tell this story. It's like super interesting because it's partly a kind of restoration thing, is partly a, hey, check out these movies you never knew existed, and it's also partly like, what is the story? Like, there is still, and I don't want to get too much into it because we have to make the game and release it, and I don't want to agree with everything, but like, what happened to this actress? Like, she disappeared, as far as everyone is aware, like the end of sort of, it's the end of like 1999 or something. So this was like 20 years ago. And no one really knows. And there's all these hugely unanswered questions. And it's, like I said, it's in this wonderful middle ground where it's kind of bit before the internet really kicked in. So there isn't like a concrete record of everything happening on the internet, right?
Right.
It'd be very hard for someone to just fall off the map in 2021 and be no trace. But it's like contemporary enough that it's not in this kind of, golden era where people are kind of obsessively combing over stuff.
Right.
So yeah, we've been trying to figure out creating something, and it says this very interesting blend of kind of this interesting nonlinear structures that we explored in earlier games, and applying that to all this really cool material we have, and figuring out how to create a kind of structure around that.
Is there anything you can say about Marissa Marcel and who she was, other than her disappearance, that really compelled you to take on this? Obviously you're a cinephile, and something like this, I imagine, would have immediately compelled you towards the project. But is there anything about her that really drew you in a significant way?
I mean, it's all super fascinating, which is why, like, when I first heard some of the stories, I was more skeptical, or kind of, it sounded very kind of, it sounded, like I say, it had that kind of ring of an urban myth to it. But like, I don't know, there's very little to know about her. And that, I think, is one of the more interesting things about the project, right? Because I tell these stories where I'm really into people filling in the blanks and the kind of negative space around things. So we know that she was cast, and this was like a big thing. And there's like a few like handfuls of like TV show things that capture some of this and talk about this, and a few magazines and things from the time. But it's generally because I think the main thing is because none of these movies ever came out, like, she just doesn't exist in the public consciousness. But the really cool thing was the first movie she made, she was like, they had this big kind of competition around casting it. Like, they saw thousands and thousands. They were trying to find like some fresh young star, kind of like when they did Harry Potter, right? And there was this whole big thing of just everyone dragging their kids in. So she is really young, and she's picked out of all these thousands of young women to star in this movie, which is this kind of gothic historical thing, which I won't dig into too much, but it's very interesting. And so she's in this movie, but that movie like never comes out, and it's not 100% clear why not. And then she kind of shows up again in New York in the 70s, making the second movie, which just kind of sounds super fascinating and is like plugged into so much of what was interesting about New York in the 70s in terms of like the art scene. And there's a few people like Warhol and stuff who are kind of in the periphery, and she's in and around and involved with those. And that movie was never finished. So at this point, it's like there is some kind of curse following her around.
Yeah.
Like the information is very thin on the ground as to exactly what happened with this movie. And then the really interesting thing is then there is nothing for 20 years or something. And then there's this third movie, which, you think like that whole period leading up to the millennium where everyone thought the world was going to end and everything kind of got a little bit crazy and there was lots of stuff going on. So she's making a movie then. And I think with that one, the shoot went on for ages. And at some point, the director died.
Oh my God.
And they decided not to carry on with the movie, and that's kind of when the trail kind of disappears, and it's just such a fascinating story with all these jumps and these different periods, and kind of, I don't know, in digging into it and researching it, like it just touches on so many interesting periods in like the history of movies, and sort of we're using it as something of a lens to just like think about movie making rather than, and I think that's what kicked the whole project off in the first place, was we weren't going to attempt to put these pieces together. We weren't going to attempt to make
the movies.
The movies, and I've seen, like, as a kid, I was really into Doctor Who, and there was a bunch of like the BBC in the old days, because and everything, like after broadcast, nothing was of use anymore because they didn't have video cassettes and stuff. They would just routinely, if they ran out of film or space, they would just like trash old stuff and just throw it out. So at some point,
oh my God,
they realized this was a bad idea, and they're like, oh crap, like we threw out all these old Doctor Who episodes and a bunch of other stuff.
Doing this.
But I remember there was a series where they tried to like fill in the blanks with just like, photos and audio, or with little animated sequences and stuff, which is terribly cute, but it's not quite the same, right? So
right.
I think what sparked this from the start was us going, well, let's not treat it as trying to, fix these movies. Let's really just use this as a kind of lens to learn more about this character. It's a bit like when what was that series that they did? Was it serial? Oh, the S Town, right? When there was this series, it was called S Town, which was a euphemism for what it really was. But it was like the people made cereal, so you're like, oh, this is going to be some
yes
murder mystery, right? And as you listen to it, you realize it wasn't necessarily be a murder mystery. It just became this fascinating kind of character portrait of this clockmaking guy, everything he was up to. And it was such a weird, interesting tale that you couldn't believe this was a documentary radio show, right? It was just such a weird, interesting story. And I think that was kind of, when I heard that, I was like, oh, this is making me think a lot of this Project Ambrosio, because we are like trying really hard to do research and dig things up and find some of the kind of peripheral details that kind of flesh this thing out. But it really is this portrait of Marissa, and kind of really trying to get our heads into her story through the work that she did, that we're kind of recovering.
It's so incredible to me that you, as a designer of, like you said earlier in the chat, negative spaces, you designed negative space for your players to interact with and engage with, and now you as a designer are, the raw material is just filled with negative space, and that must be such a interesting challenge to start from that point of absence, and think about how to bring it to an audience, bring it to to the players, rather than sort of stripping back from, you know, a fully formed tale.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so different, because I think when you're writing a mystery, and I don't know if every writer's like this, but oftentimes a mystery will start because you'll just have an idea and you will not know the answer, and you'll wonder what the answer to this question is, or what could bring about this circumstance, or you'll have two ideas that spark and stick together, and you'll try and then kind of unravel them. So there's always like a phase of writing that is trying to solve the mystery of the story idea that you had. And then you'll do research, right? So you'll say, oh, I'm going to tell a story about a shipbuilder in the 17th century. And so then you're like, well, I'm now going to go and research and read about shipbuilding in the 17th century, and I'm going to learn about these things. So there's always, and really, like, one of the things that was cool about her story and then Telling Lies was trying to create an experience that communicated some of what it feels like to me to create a story, or not necessarily to create a story, but to be in the flux, in the creative world of the story. So, right. You know, the way that those games feel, where you're just surrounded by all these little bits of pieces, and you're finding your way through it, and you're putting the pieces together, is a little bit like there is a phase of writing where you're in that world and you have all your ideas, and you're kind of surrounded by it all, and you're trying to find some order to it. So yeah, it's not too big a leap to actually shift over to this kind of mode.
I mean, you must be the leading investigator of Marissa Marcel in the world at this point.
There are some other people that we have lent on, but it's very interesting and weird. I think the hardest thing in some of the cases is when you reach out to people and want to go talk to them and tell them that you're making a video game. Right. If you said we're making a documentary for HBO, or we're writing a book, then they'd be like, oh, cool, that's very worthy.
Legit. But
to try and explain to them, like, no, we're going to create a video game that is going to dig into this world. They imagine that we're making something a little bit more frivolous or cheesy, or that somehow we're going to like put guns in it or something, like, you know. And so then you go, well, no, look, this is the kind of video game, and you show them her story or Telling Lies.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That makes a little bit more sense.
I mean, how do you find, coming from a background of her story and Telling Lies, and then being handed this sort of project, what about the foundations that you've, you know, established in the past makes video games the medium in which to bring this? Like, how do you evolve from her story and Telling Lies and get to Project Ambrosio and deliver that as a video game?
So I think the interesting thing was to think of, like, what are you doing in her story? What are you doing in Telling Lies? And to some extent, her story, the idea was you're being a detective, and we're going to give you the feeling of and replicate some of the idea of investigating and digging into this cold case. And then with Telling Lies, we kind of wanted you to have some of the perspective of somebody who's surveilling a bunch of people. Like, what does that feel like? And we tried to replicate that. And so with this one, when we're faced with all this footage, what we got excited about was making people feel like they are in an old-fashioned editing room surrounded by all this footage. Like you were going in to some archive and someone's dropping these reels on your desk, and you're like, what is inside them? And you're taking the film out and you're putting it into this old moviola machine. And then, like, the magic of movies, not to be like too cheesy, but like you have this strip and you start this machine up and the lights turn on and it goes, and then as the flames flicker past, this thing comes to life. And suddenly this these movies, this actress that no one's ever heard of is alive again in front of you. And that's like, there's some of the raw like magic that you completely forget now, right? You go and you sit in a cinema, or in fact you don't, because we're in 2021. You sit at home,
you move to your couch.
you watch Zack Snyder's Justice League on your big TV, and it's instantly there, and it streams, and maybe you have motion tuning turned on, so you're not even like, it looks disgusting, but like that magic, which the old-timey cinema people get so excited about, which is the light, and there is a projector, and the light through these images is creating this illusion and the magic of cinema. So we're like, well, that's like a really cool thing. And like on the previous projects, the experience of being in even a modern editing suite and just looking at all the footage laid out, the scrutiny that you bring to it was always really interesting to me. And we tried to kind of touch on this with Telling Lies, where we really encouraged people to slow the footage down and kind of scrutinize it. And we kind of really latched onto that. So if her story was about, and actually they use it in some high schools, I'm sorry, high school students, to teach deep reading. Like they use her story to teach kids about subtext and about paying attention to what's being said and what is below the surface of the words. We were like, well, can we make a game that is really about that scrutiny and celebration of the cinematic image? So it's not going to be textual. So there's no word searching or text stuff in this game, which is a big relief
departure
to the localization people. They're like, oh, cool, we don't have to. I mean, I'm Telling Lies, it was like, yeah, you're going to localize this into 10 languages or whatever. And each localization is a rebalance of the game.
Right.
And it's not just translating words. You're essentially reworking the level design when you start screwing with the words. So that's going to be a big thing. So we've created this cool experience where we're trying to create a gameplay experience that gives you the sense of having all this footage laid out in one of these kind of cool old machines. We've kind of abstracted that a little bit. And then we've come up with some really cool navigation mechanics, which we should probably hold back to show later, because that's like gameplay reveal and that kind of stuff. But we really thought about like, how do you translate the deep reading of text to scrutinizing and appreciating the cinematic image, and using that to actually find some unity to these disparate clips, to kind of follow threads and create a story out of these glimpses we have of Marissa and the stuff that she's done. So yeah, that's been really fun. It's been nice to revel in a very different aesthetic, because her story, there is a beauty to old VCR footage, right? When I see like the red color bleed and some kind of strange ghosting and noise lines, like that stuff is gorgeous. But to really just have all this content which kind of looks lush and has all these different visual elements, like that's kind of like it's a fun novelty.
You've described, or the Project Ambrosio has been described as a horror game as well.
I think that was me. I think I did that. I think I said that, yeah.
Okay. How does that fit into the telling of this woman's story? How does this genre that you've had so much experience in fit in here?
So definitely the type of horror that I like is the horror that is sad and true, right? Like there's a lot of horror is us processing how we feel about our mortality and kind of dealing with that in a very concrete way, putting it up on the screen. So obviously, with this story, we still don't know what happened to Marissa. Like, there is this big void that is kind of her story, and there are, as we've dug into it, kind of hints of sort of various tragedies. And I think it's probably true to say that behind the glamour of Hollywood, especially in some of these kind of older eras, there is a lot of kind of darkness. And so, yeah, I feel like as we kind of bring it together, there is going to be some of that in there. So I think that's possibly where that's going.
We have about 15 minutes left. Speaking of horror, speaking of your past, you've announced that you're working on another project that is, quote unquote, a spiritual successor to Shattered Memories.
Is this something I said again? I think it is.
I believe so. I have to check my references.
I'm causing my own problems. I think I did say that.
Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe what it means to be a spiritual successor from Shattered Memories? What are you taking from then to now?
Yeah, so yeah, I think this is probably definitely, like, her story is probably the thing that people most associate with me. I mean, it helps when you make an indie game, you can put your name on the trailers, which you can't do if you're working for a bigger publisher. But kind of the best thing I did prior to her story was this game, Silent Hill Shattered Memories, which came out on the Nintendo Wii at the perfect time, just when people were realizing that no one was buying games on the Nintendo Wii outside of Wii Sports, right? And it did like a bunch of really interesting things. It was probably, so I'd been in the games industry a little bit before we made that, and I'd made a ton of games. And this was the first one where I had the opportunity to kind of, from a blank slate almost, come up with a cool idea. And from the top down, like, this is the story I want to tell. This is how I'm going to tell it. These are some interesting ideas, and kind of plugged into, I'd been active in the interactive fiction community at the tail end of the 20th century. And this was really me kind of carrying some of those ideas through. And it definitely feels it was, I think it's never correct to say something was ahead of its time, because it's always, it came out at its time. Like, that was its time.
Yeah.
Fine.
That's fair.
But it had a bunch of things in it. So I think we were one of the first horror games where you had to run away from the enemies, where you didn't directly fight them, which has now become, at the time, it was like a super risky thing that we were doing. And now it's kind of almost the de facto mode. And it's makes sense, right? If things are scary, you run away. If you watch horror movies, mostly people end up running away from the scary thing. But like, the really cool thing with it was we had this system that would profile the player as you played. So every micro decision you made, do I walk down this path, or do I head off the path and into the forest? Do I go through every drawer in this room? Do I look at and read this forklift truck safety poster? When I'm walking with this character, like, am I paying attention to them? Am I listening to what they say? All these little micro things, everywhere you're looking, like, we were recording all that information, which is kind of like a bugbear of mine, that the video games are constantly taking so much information from the player about their intent, what's interesting them, but we very rarely use it. Pretty much every video game will, scripted events will happen when you hit this trigger box.
Right.
Things will play out. If we do want the player to influence things, we stop the game and we put a choice up, right? And then we tell them, they will remember that, or your
choice has been made.
Faction loyalty has gone up by 2 points.
Right.
But I was really into this idea that we could think of a game as being like I said earlier, campfire storytelling. So if I'm sat being told a story, The person telling me the story, it's probably a story that already exists in their head, right? So they have the structure of the story, but as they're telling it to me, they're reacting in real time to how I'm
Right.
reacting to their
Yeah.
story. They may be weaving in little elements because they know me, or they're noticing things not too dissimilar from. I would also give the example of like a stand-up comic tours America, right? So they have their show, and they know what the jokes they're going to tell are, and they know the whole vibe of it. But then they show up in Brooklyn and they go out on stage, and they maybe pepper their intro with some jokes about the local sporting team to get everyone on side. And maybe they tell like a very offensive joke, and it just doesn't go down well with the crowds. So then they're like mentally, okay, we're going to slide out the offensive material, bring in this other stuff, right? And so there's a kind of shuffling that goes on in reaction to the audience. And so I was really interested in what does a video game look like that does that, right? That rather than explicitly asking me to make a choice, and then I'm like kicked out of the experience, I'm trying to kind of min-max what my decision is, like what will happen if I say yes or no here or whatever.
It's like this reactive input system, like everything. We expect the game to jump when we press the button to jump, but what if the game knows you jumped and like learns from that and learns something about you because you jumped in that moment or whatever?
Yeah, I think it's as well just feeling that the game cares about you being sat there, right? I think this, oftentimes a video game, it'll feel like it's interchangeable who sat in front of it. And I think that one modern mechanic that kills me is you're exploring a game and you have your camera control on the right stick usually, so you can look around and look at stuff that's interesting to you, and you'll get to a point and you'll get like it's usually like R3 or X or something, press X to look, and you click it and the camera looks at the thing they really want you to see because they spend lots of time animating this cool thing. And I'm like, just let me see it. And if I don't see it, I don't see it. But if I see it, that's cool because I looked at it, right? So yeah, what we did in Shattered Memories was we took all this information, so we knew what people were doing, how they're acting. We built, using some science, but psychometrics is not the hardest of sciences, but we were using like some psychometrics to read something of what the player was like. And then we use this to shuffle and tweak the whole game world. So you would walk into a new location, and we would tweak the lighting and the texturing, and we would change the appearance of characters so that they were more or less appealing, or did what we needed that character to do. Cutscenes would change, so the kind of dialogue you had with people would change. So you might have a character who we wanted to be your best friend. So we would, if the player was coming across as extroverted or introverted, in that case, we would align this character with you. So we'd be like, well, if we want you to be best buds, we'll make this character extroverted like you are, or introverted like you are. And then there were other layers. So it was very modular. So another thing that we had a read on for the player was what is their, how do they think about authority in terms of like, do they obey authority and expect authority figures to kind of be something they can kind of look up to, versus those that have a real distrust of authority figures and kind of push against that. And this was something that, like, using the psychometrics, we had like a reasonable read on. So then we'd get that character and we'd be like, well, you might have the extrovert version, but then we'll have her share your opinion of authority. But you could also have the introvert version who has this different take. And by combining all these little bits and pieces, giving them different haircuts, giving them different outfits, putting them in different situations, every player would get a more detailed kind of version of the game for themselves. And, it was a lot less flashy than, sometimes you see games that are like, there are 16 different endings and you can choose to do this, 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 and this. And it's all about feeling powerful because you have the choice about whether or not to kill the elf or save the elf. So it wasn't flashy like that, but our sense was you were getting this more intimate, calibrated version of the story. And I
Right.
think like one of the things that would have worked great if it came out now is that we are all online and we have social media and we have online
Right.
platforms. And so you would like, there was, because we always had this question of like a replay value. And the assumption was, if you have all this variation, the point is I should replay the game and see all the different versions.
Mm-hmm.
But we always had the problem that people, because it was implicit, people didn't know what to do differently. So
Right.
people would often play it a second time and kind of, they'd think, oh, I'm going this way instead. I'm doing this thing differently. But they didn't realize that so many of the other micro decisions they were doing were pushing them towards the same thing. But it was never for us about playing multiple times. It was about owning your version of the game. And it would have been beautiful if, if the game was out now, I could see the game you're playing. I could watch you streaming it. We could share clips and pictures from it. And then it becomes super interesting because it's kind of a variation on the water cooler chat. But instead of us both having opinions about what happened last night in Game of Thrones, it's us sharing these unique little versions. And kind of really, that was a lot of what was cool about Her Story and Telling Lies was when, especially when we did like focus groups, you would have people at the end chat and everyone had their own little version and their own take on what they'd just seen, or they'd seen different bits. So yeah, in revisiting Shattered Memories, I think this was the thing we were really interested in, was in the modern generation of consoles and PCs, like how can we revisit that idea of this really interesting kind of organic human way of kind of sculpting and creating variations in content, knowing that we live in a world where we can be aware of that and where that can be kind of something that we expose everybody to. So yeah, we've been digging into that. It's very cool. Like it's I feel like we're at a great point as well where when we were working on those Silent Hill games, it was a real challenge because to hit the graphical fidelity, to express human emotions, that was like the expensive stuff, which is, at that point became like the domain of Uncharted or like the really expensive exclusive games. And I feel like we've starting to hit the sweet spot now where we're seeing more kind of AA things like Hellblade or Control, or I guess even like Death Stranding is an outlier here, but we have like the tech to actually deliver on some of these kind of emotional experiences without it costing us $100 million. And as well, I think we have the audience is ready for different, weirder things. I think, Shattered Memories was before digital, so every game you had to go to GameStop to buy, you had to go to a shop, and so you had to convince like the regional sales manager of GameStop that they should stock this game. So you always had to be pitching it as quite a straight thing. And you had to tick all the boxes. You had to have combat, puzzles, exploration, blah, blah, blah. So I think we can create these slightly more unique, interesting experiences, deliver on the kind of emotional character storytelling. So kind of really excited to jump in and kind of grapple with that.
Absolutely. I think gamers are here for it. I think with streaming and the way that we, share our experiences online, it's like the perfect time for an experience like that. So
we should go and make it.
We should make that game. That would be cool. I would love to play it.
Oh, that reminds me, we are currently recruiting for some staff members to work on that game.
We are.
If
you are a game developer, go to halfmermaid.co/jobs. We have 5 open roles currently.
Yeah, it's around that. Yeah.
5 open roles at our studio right now.
Some cool people to come make cool things.
Yes, please.
And whilst you're on the internet, you should go check out the LudoNarraCon sale, which I think is probably my favorite of all the Steam sales. I think
it's the best. It's got the best stuff in it,
Yeah, Her Story, Telling Lies. If you haven't already played them, or if you want to buy them as a gift for your loved ones, perfect gift. Um, you can go do that, and there's lots of really cool games in there as well.
Yes, and please, if you haven't, wishlist our Project Ambrosio on Steam.
That's free. That costs
that's
$0
$0
to go right now. Wishlist Project Ambrosio. Don't get distracted by how weird the page is, because you might forget to wishlist if you start digging in and questioning all that. Just wishlist it first, then read about the weirdness.
And more of the mystery will, unravel.
Well, to be honest, I think anyone that listened to this probably knows a hell of a lot more about the mystery than previously. So they can decipher some of what's on that page.
Yeah, you can begin the search. Well,
I think that's our time, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you so much, LudoNarraCon, for having us, for having Half Mermaid. Thanks for the chat, Sam. It's been fun as always.
Speak soon.
Speak soon.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye. Thank you.